Hi everyone, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. And welcome Shatrujeeth, whom I'll call, if not the Lord of the Rings, at least the Lord of mythological fantasy. Right? So,
Thanks.
welcome to the session, Warlord of Ayodhya Rebellion. So, Shatrujeeth, first question for you. You started out writing a spy thriller, The Karachi Deception. Your first book was a spy thriller. And then after that, you veered off into the Vikramaditya Veergatha series, and now this another one, which is a genre you're calling mythological fantasy. So why the change in genre?
So, hi. For those of you who are familiar with my works, you know what Gargi is talking about. For those of you who are not familiar, so my first book was actually this spy thriller called Karachi Deception. So it was an Indo-Pak spy thriller, contemporary spy thriller set in early 2000s probably. Then subsequently, so that was my first book. So, it logically follows that my next book will also be probably a spy thriller or a crime thriller set in, today's world and stuff like that. But that didn't happen because my next book actually turned out to be an epic fantasy series called Vikramaditya Veergatha, which was essentially the story of, Samrat Vikramaditya from, the Vikram Vetal stories. And so it mixed a lot of legends and mythology and all of it together, and it was a 4-book series. It started as a 3-book series. But actually, to answer your question, I think everything in my writing in that sense has been by accident. I never kind of intended it to be that way. So and even in my last session, I said that my first book was not supposed to be a book. It was supposed to be a movie script. It ended up as a book. Vikramaditya Veergatha was never supposed to be a book. Again, it was actually supposed to be, when we created that idea, we meaning it was me, and there was an artist, Paul, who does most of my book covers. So we actually wanted to do Vikramaditya, and that time there was no Veergatha. It was just Vikramaditya and the Navaratnas as a band of superheroes, and we wanted to do this for children. We wanted to sell it to Cartoon Network and Pogo. That time they were big. I don't know if they are still big today. That time they were very big.
Today, yeah.
They are big?
No, I don't think they even exist today.
They don't, is it? See, that's the point. So maybe it's good that we never went to them.
Yeah.
So, so that's what we wanted to do. But we realized that the cost of making that as an animated TV show was going to be so expensive. We'd be losing money from day one. So we kind of junked that idea. And because that idea was lying around, and my publisher at Karachi, he'd asked me, the funny bit was that he was the guy who kind of told me specifically, what are you going to do right next? And I said, I don't know. And he said, if you want to be serious as an author, you have to write more books. So I was like, acha, that's what I'm supposed to do. I thought I was done with one. So then, and honestly, I didn't have a story at that time. So I was like kind of looking around and trying to figure out what to do. And fortunately or unfortunately, the Vikramaditya, the TV show idea died. So I had Vikramaditya and the Navaratnas as a band of superheroes, and so then that's where the idea kind of started. And I said, okay, what if I make these into a series of books? And so that's really how it happened. So it was not any conscious decision that, okay, now next will be mythology, next will be so definitely not in Vikramaditya. With the latest Warlord of Ayodhya, yes, it was very conscious. I knew I wanted to tell the story of Bharat, etc., which we will talk about. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's very interesting, because so basically what you're saying is the genre chose you rather than you consciously, looking for it. But I think, what's interesting about this one is that none of your series, neither of your series or any of the books they're completely far away from retellings, because typically that's what we have, been reading. Most of the other books in this genre are typical retellings, maybe with some minor changes here and there, but they are mainly retellings. But yours is, so did you consciously steer away that I will not do a retelling and it's got to be completely, because this is fiction, because Vikramaditya was an actual life person, but we've put him into a situation where he's battling, asuras and things, which is, that's the fantasy part of it. So did you consciously steer away from, I'm not going to retell one of his or the Devas Asura story, I'm going to write something brand new?
Yeah, so again, when it came to writing mythology or mythology-based stories, one of the things I realized was that as you rightly said, there are authors who have been retelling these stories. Ashok Banker has done that with the Prince of Ayodhya series, which was essentially the Ramayana. Amish has done that with the Shiva trilogy. Now, of course, the Ramchandra series is more new, but
Yeah.
Shiva, he done that with the Shiva trilogy.
Kavita
Has been doing it constantly. With female characters. Chitra Banerjee has been doing it. I realized that two things. One is these stories, these are characters and stories that people are already familiar with. And there are authors who are already doing it and doing it well. So I think Draupadi has already been told, Karna has been told. So I thought that, these characters' stories people know. And I did not know what new I could bring to the table in that retelling. So that's when I decided that I took a character like Vikramaditya, and I said that, okay, what do people know about Vikramaditya? They know that he was supposed to be in this legendary king of Ujjaini. And there's this Vikram and Vetal stories, but there is no context to this story. How did Vikram and Vetal become friends? Okay. Or, how did these Navaratnas who are supposed to have been in his court, Kalidasa, Varaha, Mihira, Varaha. So nobody has context. So they've got individual legends, but there is no cohesive narrative about how does all of this come together. So basically that's what I did. I took those characters and kind of gave them a context and said that this is how the story will kind of pan out. What I also did was, I have done retellings in that. So when I take Vikramaditya Veergatha, for example, and I'll just give you one example.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is that Vikramaditya, Indra, who's one of my antagonists in the story, because it's the story between the Devas, the Asuras and mankind, right? So the Devas and the Asuras are against human beings. So Indra's wife is Shachi. And Shachi is actually an Asura. I mean, her lineage is Asura lineage. I found that very interesting. And I said that, okay, what is this? What is it that, how did the wife of a woman from the Asura clan become the wife of a Deva? And then I figured out that, it probably was a marriage of convenience. Okay, where maybe what had happened was that when the Asuras and Devas, and they were constantly fighting with one another, but there would also be periods of peace. Okay, which is typical as what happens. So I figured that maybe this marriage between Indra and Shachi might have been where the two of them agreed, okay, no more fighting. Let's become friends, and okay, now let's seal this friendship through matrimony. And this is very typical that used to happen during that age, right? So I just took that idea.
It's a typical Indian thing.
It's a typical Indian thing to do. And so I just took that idea. Another example is that, what I used to find very fascinating was that Shukracharya is a Deva. But he is the Mahaguru of the Asuras. I found this story fascinating. That how does the Mahaguru of the Asuras, how is he a Deva? Yeah. And then I went back and I learned the story about, how Shukracharya and Brahaspati, who is the Mahaguru of the Devas, they were both students of Angirasa, sage Angirasa, who was at that time the Mahaguru of the Devas. Yeah. So what he does is that there was a point where Brahaspati and Shukracharya, either of them could have become the Mahaguru of the Devas. Angirasa chose Brahaspati. Angirasa chose, and both of them are his students. Yeah. He chose Brahaspati as the Mahaguru. Right. Shukracharya turned around and said that, no, I am more talented, I should be the person. And he said that you have picked Brahaspati because he's your son. So in Shukracharya's point of view, this was nepotism. Correct. So he saw it from the lens of nepotism. And he turned around and said, this is a nepotistic thing. Yeah. He appealed to the Devas. The Devas said no. And then what happened was, out of spite, he went to the Asuras.
To the other side.
So these are retellings, but retellings of smaller stories.
Mini stories.
Within a larger news story. That's it.
So I think that's brilliant, because that way you've managed to, capture all of it as well, right? So you have a story that's completely your own. Very unique, right? Highly unique. Nobody else could have written that. It has to be from you. But also it includes some retelling, so people will get to learn a bit more about this part of it. But having said that, so isn't it challenging, considering that, both in the Vikramaditya series, King Vikram is a known person and he really existed, and there are some characteristics and, we know about him. Right, and similarly, the Warlord of Ayodhya, we know about Bharat. We know that he was, fairly dedicated. He loved his brother. He did not necessarily agree with his mother's, shenanigans, to be frank. So, considering that there is, the characters are already existing in canon or in real life, How do you kind of embellish that, to add your own color to it, but also retain their,
I get that, right. So Vikramaditya, for example, if one were to look at Vikramaditya and say, so I'm not talking about Veergatha, I'm talking about Vikramaditya. So the typical things would be Vikramaditya is wise, because we've heard about the Vikramital stories, right? So Vikramaditya is a wise man, there is no doubt about it. So he's almost like King Solomon, right? The Western example would be King Solomon, right? So he's wise like King Solomon. He's also noble, he's virtuous. These are the attributes that are usually attributed to Vikramaditya. There is no doubt about the fact that he was a great warrior. Okay. So what I decided was, I said that, okay, these are the traits of Vikramaditya. I'm not going to shake that. Okay. My idea is not to shake those traits. How do I build on that? So I said he is constantly going to be. So nobility of Vikramaditya is the central key to why Shiva chooses him in the first place. The fact that he's so noble is what makes Shiva come to him.
Shiva comes to him.
Correct. Yeah. So on the fact that he can wield the hellfires, but that the Devas and the Asuras can't wield these swords, but this human being can, is his nobility. So what I've taken is, I've taken that same attribute and in fact magnified it and said that, what does it mean to be noble? It's not that he's just noble. If you're noble, Shiva will give you with a responsibility. If you're noble, you'll be able to do things which the Devas and the Asuras can't do. So it's actually now magnified those same qualities. Even with Bharat, for example, again, as you rightly said, he's a known character. We know that he was this dedicated brother. He did not want to be the king.
Torn and loved.
Yeah, torn in love, and he has this big problem with his mother. So I said those are going to be constant. But what am I going to build new into it? So, for example, in Vikramaditya, what I did, how I built nuance into that character was by giving him the love story between him and his queen. The queen who is in coma. She's a woman who is in coma and this man is totally in love with her and is waiting for her to come out of coma. And when she comes out of coma, she remembers everything else but she doesn't remember him. And that's the most agonizing thing for anyone, when the person you love doesn't remember you. And then the moment she remembers him, she goes back into coma again. So I played with that character's, the trauma of his love for his wife is what I played. That emotional trauma is something that did not exist in canon. That is what I brought in here. So similarly in Warlord of Ayodhya, it's basically his relationship with his mother, with his son, Taksha. And that's what it is.
But is that relationships are there in written about in some
in for Vikramaditya?
Yeah?
No, Vikramaditya, no. So the wife is completely, it's fictionalized, totally fictionalized. In Warlord of Ayodhya, the son is Taksha, but Bharat's son is Taksha. Correct. But we don't know much about Taksha in canon, in existing. So I have just kind of built on that. That's what
those aspects that were not as much captured.
Correct.
There you can add your own flavor as well as
correct.
But hearing all this, I mean, how much of research must you have done for this?
Both the series. See, the thing is again about research. So research is, when people usually when we talk about research in fiction, we think that research is I do my research and then I do my writing. Right? That's the typical thing. I will spend 6 months researching, then I will write. Exactly. That's not how it actually happens.
But
it's never in phase. It's always constantly running side by side. So, for example, to give you that. To go back to the Shukracharya example. It was while writing Vikramaditya Veergatha that I realized that, okay, I need to explain Shukracharya's character. Why does he hate the Devas so much? Why does a Deva hate the Devas so much that he decides to go and become the Mahaguru of the Asuras? That was what triggered that search. So when I had started, I just decided, he's the Mahaguru of the Asuras, so he'll be one of the antagonists. I never understood that. While writing...
Taking it as fact, you decided to run with it.
Exactly.
And explore that.
So I think that's the whole thing. How do you kind of take that... So research. Now, for example, in Vikramaditya Veergatha, see, also it's liberating for me because these are stories which I have cooked up. Okay. So tomorrow, if I had to actually sit and retell the Ramayana, I would have to read the Ramayana. Okay, I have read the Ramayana, but I would have to read it.
Go into full detail.
Exactly. I would. Right now, I'm at complete liberty to decide what I want to do with Bharat. If I want Bharat to be in Ayodhya, he can be in Ayodhya. If I want to send him off to KKR, he can go to KKR. Because there is no documented evidence one way or the other.
Saying exactly
so, for me, research is more, the maximum amount of research I have done is actually for my first book. The Karachi
For the
Deception.
Karachi Deception,
Because
yes.
that was set in Indo-Pak.
Contemporary.
It's a contemporary
and
spy thriller.
Real events. So you
Absolutely.
can't totally
I have to understand
fictional.
Pakistan. I have to understand Pakistan, as a geography,
Territory and the
territory, their culture. I have to. So I have readers in Pakistan. I was very fortunate that Liberty Books in Pakistan, I think they acquired some 1,000 copies of Karachi Deception.
Deception.
And so the book actually sold in Pakistan. And I actually have readers from Pakistan write in, some people from Karachi. There's one guy from Lahore who had written, I forget his name, and they loved the book. So I was actually quite interested, because I thought that it's a very pro-India book, obviously. Like we're looking at it from.
Exactly. That's what I was wondering. What was their reaction?
Yeah, but they seem to like it. So one person said, "Oh, this is Indian propaganda," but okay, that is what it is. But I've had other readers who have actually told me that this is actually Pakistani readers telling me that this is nice. So that's good. Yeah.
But that's fortunate, because you can't write a book called The Karachi Deception and not get some accusations thrown at you.
Yeah, no, I guess so. But it's so hard. I think as long as you tell a good, fun story, people don't mind. That they don't care.
I think that's because that's one of my favorites. I mean, until I read your Vikramaditya series, I think Karachi Deception was one of those that I picked up, and then I regretted picking up because I had to finish in like 2 nights. Otherwise I won't get sleep until I finish.
Yeah, with Vikramaditya you have to wait for 4 years, right? Yeah,
years,
exactly.
which is
That's the difference. There are 4 books, and no question of finishing it overnight.
Yeah. So, but getting back to your research, so I think that's interesting, and for any aspiring novelists in the audience, you said that it goes side by side, which is, I think, quite interesting to know, because exactly what you said is what I had in my head as well. That 6 months of research, and then I go off to a cabin in the woods and write my novel for the next 2 years or something. But it's not like that. You don't have that luxury. But then before you sit down to write, how much research do you have to have completed that you think, right, like at some point you're going to have to say, okay, this is too little or too less, and I need to start. So what is that point? Because I think that's...
Yeah, I think that's important. But before that, even the cabin in the woods is a luxury. Okay, I mean, like...
It's part of the mythology.
Yeah, it's all part of the mythology we build for ourselves, that I'll go and in a retreat, it never happens.
Part of the
you have to sit in that room and, do your laundry and answer the doorbell and do Swiggy and all of that. Yeah, all of that. So everything, cabin in the woods is part of mythology fantasy. Yeah. So, no, to answer your question, you see, the thing about research is that you can research till there is no end to research. You can keep researching and researching and researching, and you will probably never figure out when is it enough.
Yeah.
I think what happens with research, and this is usually what I do, if I think I have enough information to start off, I'll figure out, if I need more, I'll go back to it later. One of the things I've realized is that when you go into Wikipedia is like, it's so, yeah, you can go into one story and then from there you go into another, and then after half an hour you don't know where you started. Yes. And he said, how did I land up at this
what
page?
What were you researching in the first
What was
place,
I researching? Right? What did I start with? You've forgotten about it. And there's just so much so it's very easy to get lost down that rabbit hole. It's like Alice in Wonderland. But so usually what I do is with research is I tell people that research just enough for you to start off. Because also the truth is that, you can't bore audiences with information. Just because it's interesting information for me, it doesn't mean it's interesting for all of you. Okay, and it should be relevant to the story. Yeah. So I might think that if I tell people the height of the tallest building in Karachi, it's very important that people know that. Yeah, but how is that relevant to your story? Unless my hero is jumping off. Even if he jumps off, I don't care. If it was 10 feet taller, nahi marega kya? Phir bhi marega, pair phir bhi tutega. How does that matter? So I think that's what it is. How is this piece of information relevant to your reader? Is it relevant to take the story forward? I think that's really what research is about. Is it helping your story? If it is helping, yes. If it's not taking the story forward, forget it. Not important.
Okay, I think that's good to know as well, because that's I think that's probably a separate session topic. It's so vast.
Yeah, absolutely. Researching, you can go ever and like, you can. So I must also confess, my first Karachi Deception, when I first wrote it, it's a thriller, right? Its first word count was 140,000 words. it was so large because I had put in all this nonsense. You know, what is the size of some building in Karachi? Which train should you take to go from one part of... How is this even important? But because I had done research, I thought that I knew so much about Pakistan, I must put that there. Then people, when they read it, you know, the beta readers...
Bad. You know, all my hard work is...
Oh yeah, all my hard work is gone. So when my beta readers read the book, they said, your story is very nice. It takes a long time to get to the point. That's when I realized, oh my God, I made a mistake. And I cut down 40,000 words. I cut that and brought it down to 1 lakh, and then now it's around 89,000 words or something like that. Yeah. So I must admit that it's not that I also went through that. It's very natural that, you know, it's tempting to put in everything out there because...
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that's you know, it kind of throws light on the next question is like, so that's your first book, and you did a lot of research, and as you mentioned, you went way beyond the count. You know, it's supposed to be 90,000 words. You went at 140, and now you're like 6 books later.
Correct.
Right? How has that writing process changed for you, right? From the first one that you wrote to the current one, the amount of research, or do you now hit your 90,000 target?
No, so the funny bit is that I keep telling people that every book I've written, apart from Karachi, which is 89,000 words, everything else is above 1 lakh. So the last Vikramaditya Veergatha book is actually 1,54,000 words. Yeah. So it's a massive book in that sense. It's a very massive book in that sense. Yeah. In fact, some of my readers who are, you know, the complaining type, they say that why didn't you break that into 2 books? Yeah. You know, then we would have had 5 books instead of just 4. So I am like, yeah, then if I had done that, then you would have cursed me and said, why couldn't you have put all the story together? You know, so, but yes, I tend to write large stories. I tend to write big books in that sense. So I must also admit that when the proposal for Warlord of Ayodhya went out, so it was just a kind of, you know, 5-page proposal. My agent, literary agent, he pitched it to a publisher who, they loved the idea, this Bharat story. Yeah. So they made a proposal to me to acquire the rights, and they had already decided how many pages long that is going to be. They had already decided what the price is going to be, and I hadn't even started writing it. And I'm like, how are you going to even do this? You mean to say that it has to be 75,000 words? No, I told my agent I don't want to work with this publisher because I don't work that way. Exactly. So at least, to answer your question, right now my books are all tend to be very large. Yeah. They tend to be very big. But I think my readers have come to expect that. Yeah. I think even with Ashwin, it's the same thing. You know, Ashwin Sanghi's books tend to be... I think it's isn't it a little bit also, it's a kind of a characteristic of this genre because it's, you know, the mythology aspect as well as the fantasy. It is. Fantasy books tend to be larger. Yes. But the fact that probably now you are, you know, in your initial drafts itself getting closer rather than, I'm hoping you didn't try 2 lakh word books for a 1 lakh. No, I haven't done that. But I think, so one of the good things that I've got better at is that I've got better at predicting, you know, what is going wrong with my book, either in terms of its length or its pace or whatever it is. I've got a little better with that. Yeah. So I'm able to do it a little bit more efficiently. Yeah. But having said all that, and I just gave that example to somebody downstairs, it's like it doesn't matter how many books you write, okay, or how many screenplays or whatever. The best example I can give you is actually Sachin Tendulkar, okay. It doesn't matter how many centuries Sachin Tendulkar has hit. Every time he goes out to bat, he's on 0. You start your innings on 0. He can't turn around and say, I've hit 30 centuries, now I'm going to start at 50. No, you have to start at 0. It's the same thing for us authors. We have to start with a blank page. It doesn't matter whether I've written 1,54,000 words or 5,000 words. The next one is still a blank page, and I have to write from 1 word, 2 words to whatever it is. So that is the reality. As long as we accept that. Yeah, I think that's very inspiring, and that's very good to know, because even for you know, people who are just starting out or people who are experienced, that finally when you sit down to write the book, you're still on page 0, blank page, you've got to fill it with It's words. A new story, it's a new challenge for you. Yeah.
It's a new story and a new challenge. Okay, would you have any questions from the audience? Would anyone like to ask a question?
Many retellings are happening around, and the writers today tend to humanize the characters more, remove the magical aspects or some things which don't agree with our mind. So what is your take on that? I mean, should we, because we are always enthralled by this magical aspect. There are some writers who say that this looks good on the screen, but in the book, the humanized aspect is more, what do you say? It is more appealing. So what is your take on that?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. It's good because There are two ways of looking at all stories. As you rightly said, there is the magical element to it, but then there is also the human element. I think it ultimately boils down to what the author wants. The author who's humanizing the story must understand that he or she is going to lose readers and audiences who want the magic and fantasy. And the author who goes with pure fantasy must understand that readers who are looking for human insights, he or she is going to lose them. The good thing would be if you're able to do both. If you're able to so I think, Valmiki and Vedvyas were able to do that. They gave us magic and they also gave us deeply human stories. Okay, so the story of Sita and Ram is a deeply human story. They've completely humanized it. So even if you take away all the myth and mythology, it's a deeply human story. Okay, but at the same time, it has also got the Vanaras and you've got fantasy and all those elements you've got. So I think it has to be both. When you are able to somehow do both, it's a great. I kind of agree with you at one level because in terms of when you start taking away too much of the fantasy element, and that's because I like fantasy, I think it becomes a little dry. But again, this is just me. I'm sure there'll be authors out there and readers who love that as well. But very quickly, one of the interesting things was somebody rightly said that, when everyone is taking gods and kind of humanizing them, Shatrujeeth, what you have done is you have taken a human being like Vikramaditya and actually made him until almost semi-god-like in his space. So I thought that was very interesting. So it's just something that came to my mind. Yeah. So I hope I answered your question. Right. Okay.
Yeah, that's a great point. Do we have 2 minutes for a quick...
Yeah, we can maybe take the last question.
We'll take one more? Okay.
Yeah.
These sessions can go on forever, but...
These sessions can be very interesting. They can keep going on. But just adding to the gentleman's question there, what I was thinking also, there's so much of retelling going on these days, right? And while it's very, very good to have different perceptions, and it's very good, I love to read all these different perceptions of the mythological character, of the historical characters, etc., right? But then part of me also worries in terms of, while it's good to see a different viewpoint, right, down the line, what is to say, where is the line between, what came through the scriptures and what we take to be correct and what we take to be fiction, right? Fast forward, let's say, 10,000 years. What are the kids really going to...
Is my story going to be the reality? Right,
exactly.
right. Yeah, I know. That's again a challenge, but that challenge is... Am I audible? I think I am. Okay, right. So, I think that challenge has always existed. So, the greatest example is the Ramayana. Today we have all come to accept the Lakshman Rekha as part of the Ramayana, right? But that is not there in Valmiki's Ramayana. So Valmiki, there is no reference to a Lakshman Rekha. So that is Tulsidas's interpretation. Now he has put that in there. Now today we have accepted that as part of canon, part of mythology, part of that. So, or Shakuntala's story. Like Kalida, the original Shakuntala that you read in what Vyas has and what Kalidasa does, they are two completely different characters. So I think this is a reality that we constantly face. Which version of the story becomes more popular? I think it's also a function of which story is more powerfully told, and at that point in time it connects better with audiences. So if at that time audiences felt that the Lakshman Rekha idea was powerful, that's why they bought it. Maybe there were things in Tulsi Ramayana which probably might not have worked. So I think that's what it is all about. You just have to find the myth that you add or the fantasy that you bring to the story, so there is no way of knowing what the original story was. We are assuming that it was Valmiki's Ramayana. Now, maybe that was, maybe, we don't even know. We are attributing it to Vedvyas. Whether he actually wrote that, we don't know. These are many bards across. There are some 700 versions of Ramayana. Which version of Ramayana would we follow? So I think this is always open to debate, but it's up to you to kind of, as the reader or audience, to accept and reject what works for you. That's my take.